This week on Grok Talk, my guests are former New Hampshire House Rep. Leah Cushman. She is currently leading an organization called New Hampshire Family Justice, and we're going to talk about a couple of bills, one of which appears to make parenting a crime. Before that, New Hampshire House Rep. Len Turcotte joins me to talk about a slew of bills aimed at zoning, which appear to be addressed at the so-called housing crisis, but are actually nibbling away at local control. Hang in there. Grok Talk starts in less than 60 seconds.
Grok Talk.
Not everyone can get up every day and look for ways to piss people off. But here at GraniteGrok.com, we do that almost every day. I can't tell you how many times someone's lost their SHIT and threatened to end us. But we're still here, pissing people off. It's almost like we enjoy it. And we've been doing it since 2006. That's almost 2 decades of news, politics, and opinion, and now podcasts, and we're just getting started. We believe in principles before parties and politicians. We defend free markets and individual liberty, and if that makes you mad, it makes us smile. We're like Grandma after she stopped caring what other people thought. If that sounds refreshing, you need to check us out. This is Steve McDonald for Granite Grok, and we'll keep shining the light on them for you. All right, welcome to another edition of Grok Talk, brought to you by Grok Media LLC. We have 2 guests today. I'm doing my first interview now and my second one tomorrow, and we're going to paste them together and give you a program. My first guest is State House Representative Len Turcotte. Is this your 4th or 5th term?
This is my 5th term, believe it or not, yes.
Okay, great. And how was the weather in Brisbane this weekend?
It was fantastic. Actually, almost a little bit too hot, but I was able to visit a couple nice little microbreweries. Yeah, so it was nice.
I'm jealous. Len's a Boeing 787 pilot. He flies international, so I get to live the world vicariously through Len. So, a little bit closer to home, we want to talk about zoning, and there's a lot of legislation in the House and the Senate, at least 12 bills that I could find that have something to do with zoning, and they all appear to be pointed at the, I don't know if it's real or not, problem of the housing crisis. So there's a few of these bills that are particularly troubling, and you wrote editorial for the Union Leader, which is how I realized that you were on top of this, and which is why I reached out. So let's start with that. The 2 bills that you mentioned were SB 84 and HB 577. So tell me about those and why they're dangerous.
Sure. Before I mention those, I think they're actually closer to between 16 and 18 bills. And also last year I wrote 2 op-eds. I think the Union Leader covered. One was on what I always put in quotes, the housing crisis, and at the time, ADUs. But 84, what that bill looks to do is to limit lot sizes throughout the state. What you will find is most of these bills, the big problem I have with them is they are universal, one-size-fits-all bills. Mandates from the central plan, what I call the central planning government of our bureaucrats and politicians down onto every municipality. Now, in this particular bill, the lot sizes they use are 66,000, 44, and 22,000, difference for different scenarios. The problem is it takes away the local control. And since I was on municipal and county government last year as the chairman, that's when I really became embroiled and learned a lot about our zoning stuff. So this one, again, I don't have a problem with a town saying we're going to limit our acreage to 1.5 acres, which is roughly 66,000. If the residents themselves use the warrant article process, or in the city, the council, if the individuals, the citizens of the towns and municipalities actually vote for it themselves. What I don't like seeing is, again, a central planning, almost socialist communist type of a situation where they're saying, hey, you in Barrington, you in Manchester, and you in Pittsburgh up in the north, you're all going to live under our rules. We wouldn't accept that if the feds told New Hampshire, hey, every lot in your state can't be any more than 1.5 acres. So I think there's a lot of pushback on this bill as well as a lot of others. In general, that's what SB 84 is. It's a one-size-fits-all 1.5 acre or less limitation. A town or municipality can't require more than that. And what's interesting in some of the language on the last two, and this would apply to places with water or sewer, normally it's up to the developer when he's doing a plan. If they want to have a smaller lot or whatever, they've got to show that the water systems and sewer actually can handle it. In this situation, I'll read right from it. It says, unless the municipality provides empirical evidence that the sewer or water system cannot support additional homes. I mean, that's turning everything on its head, and I don't even know how you're going to, give empirical evidence. I don't know how a town does that. But anyway, that's SB 84 in a nutshell. I don't know if you got any questions on that. But.
Well, the entire thing really unnerves me. I live in Merrimack, and we've added probably 4,000 residents in the last few years. We were around 25,000 for a very long time. And for the last at least 15 years, every year, we have odd, even watering days. And then they come along and say, we need to add more. We have apartment buildings going up everywhere. I'm like, that's, 2,000 toilets, 2,000 sinks, maybe 4,000 sinks, maybe 4,000 toilets, all filled with water, all flushing water. You're telling me that I can't outdoor water half the week. But let's add a few thousand more people in density housing, right? And it drives me nuts because what you're talking about is you're basically saying developers can do whatever the hell they want, even if there's a town and they object because of any infrastructure issue or any resource issue. And I'm like, these are Republicans, some of these people who are supporting and sponsoring these pieces of legislation.
That's correct. Actually, one of the things we dealt with last year was, and it came from a lot of the Merrimack sponsors, was they wanted the ability to turn current commercial properties into residential properties. Now, residential properties, as you just said, takes up a lot more water, a lot more bathrooms, a lot more sinks than a commercial, but yet they were pushing that. The other thing, which is kind of interesting, I wasn't aware of your situation with the odd and even days, but what 84 does, it also, well, maybe not so much 84, but a lot of these bills, they don't take into effect. Nashua is another one, another city that has huge water pressure problems, and they want to keep adding more and more. They don't talk about the cost to the taxpayers of having to upgrade water and sewer. So, that's another big issue. Interesting you mentioned Merrimack. I was speaking with a couple of your reps today on a similar but different issue. We were looking at population. You guys are quickly approaching 30,000. During the redistricting, which I was on that committee, you guys were up to about, I think, 28.5, if I remember. So by now, you're probably at 30,000.
Yeah, they're rounding off to 29. And interestingly enough, what you said about developing in commercial, there is a bill, SB 90, sponsored by Keith Murphy, Dan Innes, and Tim McGow, my state senator who used to be one of my state reps, allowing high-density residential development on land zoned for commercial use. It's one of the 16 or however many bills that they're pushing. So,
yep, and that's one we're currently going to be dealing with. Another one that I will be, you can be assured I will be fighting back against. And interesting, those names you mentioned in my union leader op-ed, I think I had told you we had a little bit of the op-ed actually taken out. I, in a subtle way, referred to some individuals without calling their names, and that part of the op-ed was taken out. But what you will see on a lot of these bills, you will see Tim McGow, you will see Keith Murphy, the senators, you will see Jason Osborne, you will see Joe Alexander, and occasionally Joe Sweeney and a few others. It's the same individuals on these bills, and they're...
Would you like me to read the excerpt they left out? I have it.
Sure, I would love to hear it.
Okay, this is what the union leader cut out. Until recently, the prime sponsor lived on a 3.6-acre lot in upscale subdivision in Bedford with strict protective covenants. A co-sponsor of the bill, who resides in Auburn, lives in a covenant-protected high-end neighborhood which requires at least 2-acre minimum lots, and one of the covenant reads, desires to preserve the peaceful country atmosphere and natural state of the subdivision and to ensure the subdivision is used for the attractive purposes only, and that all improvements located on the subdivision shall be harmoniously landscaped, used and maintained so as to preserve the investment and resale value of the subdivision.
Correct. And that's just one of the many, pages and pages of protective covenants. And both these individuals are telling us that, not me personally, but the state, the maximum is 1.5 acres now, yet they live in or have lived on in that situation. I think I mentioned in the bill, there were a couple op-eds that Senator Murphy and Joe Alexander put out where they were calling anybody who's opposing what they want to do snob zoning. Well, I think just by what you read, you hear, who really other snobs here?
It is true. And there's nothing snobby about being concerned about resources and the infrastructure and the cost.
Absolutely.
And water pressure and water availability. We run on wells in Merrimack. We have, I don't know how many we have now. I think they've shut a few down. But, it's a limited resource. We are apparently having to limit it, and we just keep adding more housing. And if you do something like this, developers in this state in the last 10 years kind of remind me of the kind of people that they talked about when the railroads were in charge of everything. There were these robber baron railroads. The developers in the state, it seems to me, for years have been able to get whatever they want.
Yep. And quite honestly, what you're seeing here, and I think I mentioned in the op-ed, is it's a concerted effort by, a small group of individuals, mostly the ones on the sponsors who have sponsored these bills. But there's other individuals behind the scene that are directing this stuff. I'll leave it at that for now. As we go further down,
that's the way to go.
Yeah.
And you'd end up with a horse head in your bed. All right, so
right, exactly.
77 deals with accessory dwelling units. Why don't you tell you what those are?
Sure. Years ago, they actually passed, again, before I was on municipal and county, so it was kind of went right over my head. I didn't even realize it. But they passed a bill that mandated that any property, any single-family property in the state must allow a accessory dwelling unit, only at the time it had to be attached. In other words, like an in-law apartment or something like that. Well, what this bill basically does is says, let's back up 1 second. Last year, they actually tried to push a bill that would allow 2 accessory dwelling units, one attached and one detached. We were able to get that effectively killed at the last minute through the Senate, but now they're back saying an accessory dwelling unit can be either attached or detached. Now, here's the problem with that. I don't know what kind of neighborhood you live in, but I always think of the single-family neighborhood where my mom grew up in North End of Manchester. Small lots with a ranch on it or a small colonial. What this bill would do, it would allow up to a 950 square foot, call it an apartment. That's what they want to do here, to be built on pretty much any single-family lot in the state, to be detached. So their idea is, well, if we do that, then that opens up it opens up availability for in-laws or whatever. But what's going to happen, and I've been warning people about this, is you're going to have the developers come in, buy up these single-family houses, put up an ADU on the property, detached, and sell it and or use it as rentals or short-term, STR, short-term rentals. So let's say you live in, and again, I don't know where you live, Steve, but let's say you've got 2 neighbors on each side of you and you're in a nice little subdivision. They pass this, both your neighbors on either side can put up these 950 square foot buildings, rent them out to who knows who, and you bought in a neighborhood for the reason because you want to be in a neighborhood that's single family that has a backyard where you don't have rentals. Now all of a sudden, because they forced this on, because they're mandating it, you now have 2 houses on either side of you that have small apartments that they're renting out, and now you're in a rental neighborhood. That's going to be what absolutely ends up happening. It'll be slow. It'll take time to do it. But once this goes in, it's going to happen, and you're not going to be able to turn it back.
And this is being jammed down the throat of every single town in the state by the state legislature, which is the big problem.
And all these bills that we talk about, the housing and the zoning things, that's the problem I have with it. I don't care if Merrimack decides they want to pass something like that because you guys want to do that. I'm fine with that. But I don't want state bureaucrats and politicians in Concord telling you or me this is what will happen. Because one of the big things they keep claiming is, well, it's a property rights issue. So the question I always ask them is, what about Steve McDonald, who lives between two people? You're going to end up taking away your property rights and what your expectations were when you bought that property by then allowing people on either side of you to turn their property into rental units, right? So, yeah, there's property rights issues, but the people in your municipality should be deciding what you do, not the politicians, not guys like me up in Concord.
True, and this also affects property values, affects taxes, and all that other municipal stuff we talked about earlier.
Absolutely.
I mean, I'm a little aggravated that I already get taxed for value my home has that I haven't benefited from yet every single year, but that's a different problem. At least I know I have the potential to sell the property for that value and then benefit from that in future years.
Correct.
They'll have to pay taxes on it. But if now I've been taxed on that value and they've changed the zoning and now my property value goes down, so I've paid taxes on a value that no longer exists.
That's correct.
And I know how it works. They just change the rates to get the money they want. So that's sort of an ethereal sort of fantasy idea that people have about how property taxes work. But I mean, if you're concerned about tax values and property values and you start doing stuff like this, things are going to change and you didn't get to vote for it.
Correct. And again, I'll say it again because this is something I have to keep repeating and most people don't understand it. Local control. I don't care what you do in Merrimack. I don't care what my town. Interesting, my town in Barrington, talking about lot sizes, they just passed a new warrant article that increased our lot size minimum from 80,000 square feet up to 3 acres. So we're going the opposite way. Now, I can argue both sides of that coin. I didn't have a dog in the fight, but if Barrington, that's what our citizens want to do, we should be able to do it and not be told that we can only do 1.5 acres or whatever.
So I'm going to get your thoughts on two other bills before we cut the cord on this one. SB 174, like I said, sure. I found 12. I'm sure there's more. But these two in particular caught my attention. And one of them I absolutely despise. And the other one, I don't like it, but I'm not sure why yet. So this is SB 174, prohibiting planning boards from considering the number of bedrooms a given unit or development has during the hearing and approval process. What's up with that?
I'm going to be honest on that one. I've tried to figure that one out myself. There's obviously something there. I haven't figured out what the issue is. I can only guess that they don't want a town planning board or the town regulations to say, if you put up an apartment building, you can't have any more than a 2-bedroom unit or more than a 3-bedroom unit. Not this specific bill, but last year when I was on municipal and county, some individuals were trying to play games with the number of individuals and number of bedrooms in units. So it's the only thing I can figure on that. I really don't know. Okay,
so here's the one that just shook me. SB 163. So part 2, no ordinance, this is the state telling all the towns, no ordinance, regulation, or policy may be enacted or enforced that delays or restricts the issuance of building permits or the approval of subdivisions and site plans due to growth management concerns, municipal service capacity, or any other reason. I'm like, kill that. Why can't my town? You're telling me my town can't care about any of the things we've talked about in the last 20 minutes because they don't have the right. They want to take it away.
Yeah. Yeah, again, that's just one more of the 16 or 18 that I found. There's another one, I don't have it in front of me, Steve, but it talks about towns and municipalities being prohibited from enacting any growth ordinances. I don't think that's the one you're talking about. I think it's actually yet another one. But yeah, I mean, those are the decisions that the towns and the municipalities have to be able to make. We can't have top-down mandates tossed about on the entire state. So yeah, that's just another one. I was trying to think. I thought I had brought up one other one that I wanted to talk about. Oh, yeah, this is a big one. It kind of sailed through, and they pushed it through very, very, very quickly. HB 399, and it was establishing a commission to study New Hampshire's Zoning Enabling Act. The problem I have with, of course, it came out of our newly formed housing committee in the House itself. That is new. Last year they had a ad hoc committee for it, and the problem is with that committee is I'm going to say it's stacked. It's stacked with people that are going to basically just say, yeah, let's go with this. So it came out of that committee, I believe, unanimous. There might have been one vote against it. It went on consent calendar and they pushed it through. Then it went over to the House and they immediately voted it up. It went to the governor already. That's how quick they push it. Now, here's the issue I have with it. The reason I believe they're doing it is they're going to have a commission study the issue. You look at the members of the commission who are going to be appointed. I could almost give you the names now who are going to be on this commission. And those individuals are going to, of course, come out with their report. And it's going to be, well, the commission recommends we do this and this and this and that. And we're going to get just more, much more of this same stuff. So that it looks like a bill that's kind of no big deal. It's just a commission. That's going to be a really big deal, one to watch. So I think that was the only other one. I mean, like I said, there's a ton of them. We've got one that we're pulling off the consent calendar this week that I'm going to speak on the House floor against. Matter of fact, a lot of people from Wyndham and I believe Merrimack have been emailing us saying we can't have it. Again, I don't have it in front of me. So that one's going to be pulled off consent. Hopefully we can kill that. But they're just pushing these things through. The ultimate goal, I'll tell you, the ultimate goal, and I mentioned before about individuals behind the scenes, the ultimate goal is they want to eliminate all zoning in New Hampshire. But they can't do it in one fell swoop. So they're just doing it bit by bit by bit by bit, to get it down. That's the other one. Last year, they passed a bill that would require no more than 1.5 parking spaces. It used to be 2 for like an apartment or a house or whatever. There's a bill in this year. They passed 1.5 last year. There's a bill in right now to bring it down to 1, So they're just chip, and eventually they're going to say 0. So
That's not going to work very well. I'm going to...
No.
This isn't a partisan issue either, because I found an article by Durham Town Manager Todd Selig, and he's a little upset about this. He says local zoning serves several vital functions. It helps ensure that development doesn't outpace infrastructure capacity, preventing strain on roads, water systems, and schools. Zoning safeguards sensitive ecological areas and preserves open spaces for wildlife habitat, like those special neighborhoods we were talking about. Ecological areas, preserves open spaces, and public enjoyment. It is the judicious hand guiding the growth of our towns, ensuring that the New Hampshire we love and the tourists pay to visit remains recognizable to future generations. That article's on Seacoast Online if any of our viewers want to see it. So it's not, you're in the House. Do you get a sense from some Democrats that they don't like this either?
I can tell you for a fact, I'm glad you brought up the issue. It is not a Republican versus Democrat issue. Very bipartisan. I know Todd Selig. I met him last year for the first time. There was a bill put into the House that they wanted to. Durham has had, if you've been around New Hampshire, like I have my whole life, they used to have a lot of issues with college students. So they developed local ordinances to prevent certain things from happening. A bill was put in that they wanted to rip all those ordinances away. We were able to kill it. But in the process, I got to know Todd pretty well. I met with him. And when I saw that this came out the other day, I put it on my Facebook page and said, hey, Todd, what an excellent article. You've got Todd, I can tell you, it's Durham, I know. Todd Selleck, he's over there. And I'm over there politically, but we are on the same page almost identically when it comes to this, the zoning issue. So, yeah, absolutely. Great article if anybody wants to take a look at it.
It is. So, live free or die except for zoning. Got it.
Correct.
We got a couple minutes left. Anything else you want to touch on?
I really don't. I think we pretty much covered pretty much everything I wanted to talk about. I wish I had the bill number that we were pulling off the table so I could talk about it a little bit more, because it's and talking about bipartisanship. I've had multiple calls on that already. Len, are you going to speak against it? We need to get it off, and not just from the Republicans. Last year, a lot of these bills that we killed, it was a bipartisan effort with myself and several Democrats on the other side, because it's not just a Republican or Democrat issue. It's all of our issues. It's about local control. We want to keep the ability to control what our towns do. We don't want anybody else telling us how to do it.
All right, well, Len Turcotte, thank you very much for spending time with me this afternoon. You can just, if you find that bill, just email it to me, and I'll put it in the description so people can check it out. And thanks a lot. You have a great day. And you're going to Auckland next? Is that what you...
This Friday I go to Auckland and do the same kind of thing I just did with Brisbane. Yeah, it's a long flight. It's about 17 hours over and about 14 and a half, 15 back. Yeah, it's a long flight, but luckily we have 2 full crews, so makes it a little bit better. I will get you that other bill as soon as I hang up from you.
Thanks for tuning in. We hope you'll make time to check out all of our podcasts, brought to you by Grok Media LLC and GraniteGrok.com. Mondays at 8 p.m., it's Right Side Up. On Tuesdays, it's our live show from 7 to 9 p.m. Eastern Time, Granite State Live. Wednesdays, tune in at 8 o'clock for Justice for All. Thursdays, 8 p.m., it's Grok Talk. Friday at 8 p.m., it's Manch Talk. Saturday, again at 8 p.m., The New England Take. And Sunday at 8 p.m. Eastern Time, it's Vermont Daily Chronicle Television. We are your source for local podcasts, news, politics, and opinion, brought to you by Grok Media LLC and GraniteGrok.com. Not everyone can get up every day and look for ways to piss people off. But here at GraniteGrok.com, we do that almost every day. I can't tell you how many times someone's lost their SHIT and threatened to end us. But we're still here, pissing people off. It's almost like we enjoy it. And we've been doing it since 2006. That's almost 2 decades of news, politics, and opinion, and now podcasts, and we're just getting started. We believe in principles before parties and politicians. We defend free markets and individual liberty, and if that makes you mad, it makes us smile. We're like Grandma after she stopped caring what other people thought. If that sounds refreshing, you need to check us out. This is Steve McDonald for Granite Grok, and we'll keep shining the light on them for you.
Grok Talk.
All right, welcome back to the second half hour of Grok Talk. My guest for this segment is Leah Cushman, who is a very active parent in defending parents' rights and recently started an organization called New Hampshire Family Justice. And we're going to talk about some really, really awful bills, aren't we?
Yep, and some good bills, maybe.
Okay, well, the one that kind of started this whole conversation for us anyway was HB533. And you've written about it on Granite Grok. I've seen some stuff about it on Reason Magazine, and it's kind of a mess. What was the original intention?
So it came from a study committee about defining child abuse, and they wanted to, I think the legislature felt they needed to do something in the wake of the Harmony Montgomery case, where, children were slipping through the cracks, and, DCYF was implicated in a lot of failure. So they it's well intended. So basically, the bill redefines what constitutes abuse. It's a definition change bill, primarily.
And I looked at the bill, and you've obviously been through it a few times, and there are some concerns. I know I read one quote that said it basically turns DCYF into the well-being police.
Right. The biggest issue is that a lot, and we've seen this before. We saw it with HB533 last year. They're adding, emotional and psychological welfare endangerment to the definition of abuse. And the major issues are that it's very vague. They tried. I don't think that the committee didn't try to make it clear, but a lot of these things are not tangible, are difficult to find, and then it leaves discretion basically up to the judge to determine what physical is more easy to prove with objective standards, but emotional and psychological welfare is more difficult. And the major issue is that these definitions, by changing it in family court where DCYF cases are adjudicated, so-called, where they're heard, they have what's called a rebuttable presumption of harm. So if it's determined by the judge via evidence and testimony presented by DCYF, who are caseworkers, they can have a bachelor degree in anything, and not necessarily are psychology experts. They can say, there's emotional and psychological abuse with this child, and then once they establish that, there is then in the court a rebuttable presumption of harm, meaning the court presumes that the parent is guilty and the parent has to then overcome, and the burden is shifted from the state onto the parent to prove innocence rather than prove the state proving guilt. So that's the major issue with expanding the definitions.
Yeah, that's not something I would want our state family courts to be able to do.
Right. We've seen massive failure with the family courts. I mean, they place kids with convicted child abusers. As I've said on Granite Live before, not too long ago, a 17-year-old girl and her 1-year-old infant were placed by the family court with a man who was convicted of sexually assaulting a 12-year-old and 6-year-old girl. So, I mean, and that's just one example. I've heard many. So it's because the processes in family court are different from a court of law. They're very arbitrary. They can waive rules of evidence. They don't pursue perjury. So DCYF has actually been caught lying many times, but are not held accountable. So giving more power of discretion to these judges and DCYF is very concerning, and I consider it a real threat to constitutional due process and parental rights.
Now, you did have a bill, HB 652, which was to abolish family court. That bill it wasn't tabled, it's still alive, but it's been set aside for a little bit. What do you think the chances are that comes back as something viable next session and that we can move it forward?
Well, it's interesting. It's a good question. It was retained, and I'm thankful it was retained because now my organization, New Hampshire Family Justice, we're a 501c4 nonprofit. We will have some time to inform the public, inform legislators, activate the grassroots, and come back with, a lot of input into the legislative process regarding that bill. So we have, and if it's retained and they decide to keep it until and not reconsider that motion and ITL it this year, then it will be coming back. It'll be worked on over the summer or the fall, and then it'll come back in January. So we can see how that goes. Parental rights is something that's a main issue right now for a lot of voters, and I think most people, if they knew what is going on in the family court and how it works, they already don't support it being in place. It's only 20 years old, and it's been a complete failure for children and families in that 20 years. They kind of use civil process for abuse when that should be criminal. They don't, DCYF is basically acts as the police, even though they don't have police power of investigation, and they kind of mess up investigations at times. So it's a mess. So we'll see. It was interesting. Jason Osborne tweeted the other night a poll. Is it finally time to abolish the family court? And there were about 34 votes, the last that anyone saw it that I know, and it was 90% yes. But then he deleted the tweet. So I'm not sure what that means as far as House leadership and what they're thinking. I'm sure the Senate will be opposed to abolishing it, but we need to let people know about it.
There's definitely anybody who's familiar with family court in New Hampshire or DCYF. I'm pretty sure that they would rather leave their children with strangers than give them control of their child. It's really that bad for people who aren't familiar. Claire Best has written a bunch of articles about that sort of thing on our website. Of course, Leah has too. We've had more than a few of those. Skip Murphy has had a long relationship with DCYF, sometimes good, sometimes bad. But overall,
Right.
It's not well regarded. And do we have anything else in the pipeline that might help us address that?
There is a bill by Erica Leon that I haven't gotten to review fully, but it calls for a complete audit of DCYF. So I don't know where that stands right now. I have to look. But I support, in theory, I support that bill. But they've been shown to be complete failures many times. There's an Office of the Inspector General report from, I think, 2018 that just shows like the horrific failures. And every year we have lawsuits. I mean, it's the family court and DCYF are so intertwined that together they've cost the state a lot of money in restitution for depriving rights, for getting it wrong, ruling wrong, causing harm to children. So I don't know. We'll see. The only government agency that's really calling out DCYF like consistently is the Office of the Child Advocate, who can be useful for parents and foster parents and other people who are looking out for children who where DCYF is failing, and they can also not be helpful sometimes, depending on how and if they want to get involved. But they do consistently call out DCYF in the Oversight Commission on Children's Services for their failures, and they've been trying to subpoena documents from DCYF and DCYF and DHHS, and they just are ignoring the subpoenas. So even court orders. There was one parent who went to the Supreme Court and got 5 court orders for DCYF to comply with something, and they just don't. So they're a very rogue agency, in my opinion. So we'll
we
see.
had another bill. Yep. Yeah. Oh, I know. So HB 775 had a hearing on Monday. Yes, the 18th. Tell us a little bit about that bill and anything you can tell us about the hearing.
I did not get to listen to that hearing, so I don't have much. But basically, I heard a little bit from the director of the last remaining visitation center, and he was all for it, saying it's not going to cost the state any money, and they anticipate federal funds to cover it. And this is the dangerous game that we've gotten into playing, is relying on federal funds for things that ends up mandating us to do things a certain way that not necessarily is compliant with Constitution or what's good for our state. So basically there's one visitation center left, and the idea is for people who have to make visit handoffs or custody handoffs more safe, because people now will do it if there's a protective order against one parent to the other. they can't be within a certain amount of feet from each other, so they have to do the handoff in the presence of a police officer or outside a police station or a public place if there's no protective order, and basically the visitation centers, and there's a lot of merit to that, and I would agree with that in a lot of ways, but in the past there's been some conflict of interest between some judges and the owners of the visitation centers where they're real close friends. There were some lies stated in the hearing on that bill by that director that there's never been any problems. When there was a murder, a guy walked in and killed the kid and the wife. I'd have to look up. I have to look up the details of that case again. I did post it somewhere, but so they have not been without incident. I didn't appreciate that, but yeah. So the idea is to expand and have a visitation center in every county again. So there would be merits to that, but the issue is that when parents get these orders for supervised visitation, they're paying for them, and the billing is unlimited. And the family court tends to want to protract cases and generate more and more billing and incentives from the federal government and grants from the federal government. I won't say that every family court judge does that, of course, but we do see patterns where some tend to more than others. And yeah, it just, if there was due process in the family court, we need, it would be better to validate that there were needs for these orders for supervised visitation. And it would be easier to know that there really is this demand for these visitation centers, but without the real due process components being present in family court, it's hard to say if this is really needed. And to say that it's not going to cost the state any money. The one that exists now, it's in Stratford County, and the county took over the payment for it because they don't have enough referrals to the visitation center court orders to qualify for federal funds. So I think they'd be looking to increase supervised visitation orders in order to secure the federal funding. And right now, if they can't artificially create that, or if it doesn't naturally exist, then it really does cost the state, because a lot of these are like reunification visits at the current one with people who spent time in prison, and now they're getting to know their child again after a long period of being away, and DCYF does cover the costs of those visits. So, and I don't know, like in some indirect way, it will cost the state money.
Sounds to me like they want to take more children away so they can generate revenue to justify these centers. Does that sound right?
I mean, it's possible. In order to generate Title IV D, you have to have one non-custodial parent. So that's why they don't like the 50-50 starting point for custody, because that then makes it harder to secure the Title IV-D money. They need child support, or in order to have a child support order, you have to have one non-custodial parent. And then Title IV-E is like foster care and in-home visit services from DCYF, things like that. And so they kind of go hand in hand. You generate Title IV-D and E with a lot of these cases. And originally the program was going to be insolvent shortly after it was started, the family court program, because they didn't have enough cases for the federal funds. And then they started, and that Title IV-E and D are supposed to be like a recapture program for low income people who are using government services. It's supposed to be for people who are low income. And then they started misapplying it and bringing in higher income and middle income families into child support orders through BCSS. So it's kind of borders on fraud how they're using the program now, but they need that high caseload. They need about 20% protracted cases, which means high conflict. is what they call it. But basically dragging out the court case, keeping people coming back to court for more orders, more motions, more therapist evaluation, more attorney fees, more filings. So they do need to keep a high caseload going in order to keep the federal funds flowing into the state.
And HB553 would help with that.
It certainly would. It would make it much easier. And there's actually some language in that bill that mirrors another federal act, which I don't have on hand, but it's about severe impairment. So they added this definition of severe impairment, and it includes one act of, let me find it, one or more, acts of emotional, psychological, or physical abuse that establishes severe impairment. But establishing that severe impairment has happened will generate more Title IV-E funds. I believe it's Title IV-E. It might be another federal program, but there's more grant money that could potentially be triggered by adopting this language. And that's something we really need to get better trained about looking for in RSAs and in bills when they come through, is what federal grant money are they trying to capture with this bill?
I agree. I think, when you're talking about allowing judges or even, say, school teachers or somebody else or a third party who begins a process by making an accusation or a statement about a student who was maybe misgendered or dead named or some other nonsense. I mean, that I could see that very easily being flagged as, some kind of mental cruelty that would trigger this whole process.
Right. Yeah, the terms are, and I'll read some if I may. So like emotional abuse, under this, it expands the definition to mean a persistent pattern of threatening, demeaning, or humiliating behavior directed at a child by a caregiver, which may include, but not limited to, rejection, communicating that a child is worthless, unwanted, or unloved, which may cause harm to the child's emotional development or sense of well-being. Neglecting emotional needs. So this is where you really get into some subjective territory. There's no standard, and it's up to discretion and what DCYF says, and the courts typically rubber stamp. Failing to provide necessary emotional support or affection to a child, depriving them of care, attention, and nurturing essential for their healthy development. So if I don't supply you emotional support in favor of you identifying as a gender opposite to what you were born, does that satisfy that? Shaming or humiliating, engaging in a pattern of persistent criticism or belittlement likely to cause emotional harm and undermine the child's sense of self-worth. So this is likely to cause, not even proven to cause. So they don't need a psychologist to say, yes, there's been a persistent pattern and it has caused emotional harm to the child's self-worth. Terrorizing, using threats, verbal aggression, and of course, no form of verbal, emotional, or physical abuse should be, permitted. Parental rights are not absolute, but this kind of drifts. This is a slippery slope, right? It drifts into the area of, are we micromanaging how parents are parenting, and who is the arbiter of what good parenting is and what bad parenting is? This could essentially, just left in the wrong hands, which we see terrible decisions made by family court and DCYF all the time. It could be used to tear apart a healthy, happy family. So it may lead to emotional harm and instill fear or anxiety. So things like that. Isolation. This one, it's like if your child is grounded and can't have access to their phone, it says the deliberate act of restricting or preventing a child from engaging in social interactions with family, peers, or the community for a prolonged amount of time. I was grounded for 2 months when I was 16 because I did something really bad. And, could that trigger this then rebuttable presumption of harm where my grandparents who raised me, if DCYF had gotten involved and I said, and I corroborated it or even if I didn't, and I said, they're emotionally harming me, they're restricting my access to my peers, and I'm emotionally deprived and harmed by this socially, it's a social and emotional deprivation, then could the court say yes? And then my grandparents would have been presumed to have harmed me, and they would have to prove their fitness, and it would shift the burden of proof from the state to them.
Just about everybody who was a teenager in the state of New Hampshire would end up in the family court system.
Right, they could. Every teenager thinks their parents are very unfair. I mean, I did for sure. I was, very rebellious myself. But, and then there's like Attorney Markell, Representative Markell in the committee. He made the point that it's the CPSWs, the social workers who are going to family court from DCYF, representing DCYF, and making these claims. They are not, there's nothing in this bill that requires a psychological evaluation by, a psychiatrist or a master's level psychologist. It's just whatever DCYF says, and they don't even have the expertise that's outside of their, their scope of practice. And I don't think that they should be able to make these claims and establish these as facts. And unfortunately, there's no real appeal from family court because the facts that are established are the facts, and they can't be re-scrutinized in an appeal to the Supreme Court. Only matters of law can, meaning how the law was applied was the process fair. So as long as they follow the statute, which the statute undermines due process, there's really nowhere for parents to turn after that to get redress.
That's not at all concerning, considering the public schools want to become mental health clinics. So I see a lot of things piling up here, heading in the wrong direction. So are there any good bills, about family and children or anything like that, so we can end on a positive note?
Yeah, so HB 652, abolishing the family court. It's time. It's just been a complete failure. There's going to be an op-ed by myself and another member of New Hampshire Family Justice, Katrina Heinrich, in the Union Leader coming up, just talking about this because there's a push to make the narrative that the kids in the system are, and there's a push in committees too. Ken Weiler made some callous comments, and I know we want to end on a positive note, but I just don't want people to fall for the narrative that the kids at YDC, who many were there because they were overflow from foster without a place to go. My daughter's waking up. Hold on, baby. That they are the problem and that they weren't victims and that these contracted employees weren't perpetrators who need to be responsible and that the state isn't responsible. And even in committee, they say, oh, these poor judges, I wouldn't want to have their job. Well, try being a parent without due process. So I really, people learn about HB 652. I sign up for our email alerts. Hi, honey. We'll be done in 1 second. NHFamilyJustice.com. And, we write about all of this stuff to help it make sense and for people to understand, because it's kind of complex from the outside if you don't know much about it. But that is one of the major solutions. And I'd like to see also law enforcement resume investigations of child abuse and child abuse to be a criminal matter and no longer civil. So we stop placing kids with people convicted of abuse and we stop treating it as civil and bring it into a court of law and actually convict and not just let it go when we know it's happened. Instead of DCYF being involved, DCYF should be relegated to actual social services. In my opinion, they should provide therapy, parenting classes, things like that. They should actually be there to help families without the conflict of also being the source of removing children, because I think that makes people afraid to reach out for help.
Okay, we're going to let you go back to being a parent, since that's way more important than this. And I want to thank you for being on the program with me today, and you have a great day.
All right, you too. Thank you.
Thank you.
Rock Talk.